Thank you so much. And thanks for all of you being here this afternoon for the session. We're looking forward to a really interactive session where we won't do much talking, but we hope you'll do a lot of talking. And so this is our plan. We're going to have 3 parts. First is about addressing implicit bias. The second part is continuation of recognizing community cultural wealth, but extending it beyond our study of Black science majors to students that you interact with here at Oakland University. And then it's really important to take this knowledge and put it into action. And so we want to support you to do that as the third part of today. And down here is a picture of 3 undergraduate co-researchers, our collaborators, Morgan Beckham, Brandon Marshall, and Kristen Walls. And I want to highlight them because a lot of what we're doing today are some activities that they created and developed as a leadership team. And so I just wanted to make sure we said their names and gave them credit. So some of the objectives that we have for you today, to understand the effect of implicit bias on Black students, and very importantly, how we can address racial microaggressions that we might observe or hear about. And then we talk about implicit bias, but we also know that these unconscious beliefs, in order to be shifted, often need to be replaced by other ideas. So how can we do that using results from community cultural wealth research? And then finally, creating an action plan that can improve the learning environment for students at Oakland University, especially those from marginalized groups. So for part A, addressing implicit bias, I think most of you were with us this morning. Thank you for spending that time. We talked about how in our study, the Black science majors at a predominantly white institution experienced a lack of Black classmates and had frequent experiences with racial microaggressions and some experiences with overt racism. And when we think about a predominantly white institution and we say that a lot of the experiences were racial microaggressions, we know that that can be generated from implicit bias. And as many of you already know, implicit bias includes attitudes and thoughts that are automatically associated with a group of people. It's really important to note that these are ideas that may not be consciously known to the individual, that they're conditioned, meaning we receive pervasive messages in our culture, whether we agree with them or not, that attempt to reinforce these implicit biases. But then on the bright side, they're malleable, meaning we have the opportunity to change them. And so the first part today is just further examining how does racial implicit bias affect students? And then really the key part is what can we do? Because we are bound to witness or hear about these events, and we need to be ready to take action. So we'll get right to the working part of the workshop, turning things over to y'all. And what I'll ask you to do is to form a small group of 2 to 3 people, and to, with the handout you've been given, read the first and second scenarios under part A. And you'll see there's discussion questions for your group to address together. So please generate answers to those questions and take notes, and be ready to share the answers in a discussion so we can learn from one another. Now for our colleagues on Zoom, there should be a link dropped in the chat for you so that you'll have all the same resources we do for this part A, and we'll continue to drop links in the chat for the other parts as they come up. And so we're going to give you about 15 minutes, and we'll be circulating in case you have any questions or things you want to talk with us about. But we look forward to hearing your ideas about how these scenarios, which came from our data, could be addressed.
So let's reconvene back to the larger group. So thanks for discussing these scenarios individually within your groups. So we want to bring it back and kind of share the answers with the larger group. So I'll start with scenario 1. Now that we have the handouts in front of us, on each scenario, so for those folks in the Zoom chat, The scenario reads: imagine a situation where you have been assigned your students to small groups to answer challenging questions in class. You notice a Black student is struggling to interact with his white group members. He is sharing correct answers and ideas, but they overlook his comments and continue to have a conversation without him. So those are the discussion questions posed for this scenario. Any group want to volunteer, kind of share your answers with the larger group? And we'll also monitor the Zoom chat for any Zoom responses as well. So go ahead. Yes.
Hello, everyone. We're from Wayne State over here. We just kind of pulled together. For the experience and how it would impact our student, we think it could lead them to feel alienated, withdrawn, ignored. It could affect their self-esteem. They might start gaslighting themselves and thinking they're incorrect compared to all their other students, even though they have the correct response. And as an instructor, we kind of talked a little bit, as not all of us are instructors at this table, but we thought about things that we might give advice of or think about. Proximity being a big one, like just making sure you're listening and paying attention to walking around the room, because maybe if you're sitting at the front of the room and just looking out, you might assume everything's great, everyone's talking. So just maybe really paying attention and listening to those conversations. And then if you are noticing maybe that someone is speaking up and they are correct and maybe they're not being heard, going over there and saying, oh, I heard something really good over here, and maybe trying to draw that out a little more and validate, their correct responses. And it said, how might implicit bias impact one's response to the scenario? What did we say? Thank you. Assuming fault. So the idea, and I really like, Trevor made a really good statement about this, is a lot of the times we might say, oh, that one person isn't speaking up in a certain way or they're not communicating effectively, when really it's the other three people are not listening actively. And so we might have to change our viewpoint on what the problem is and how we resolve that problem.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you. So before we'll take one more group contribution, volunteers. We'll reconvene as a group together. Come over here.
So, yeah, like we were saying, like the student would probably be angry or frustrated, but what can we do as an instructor? I actually told them what I do. So I've experienced this as a student and I've experienced this as an instructor. So that's like fun on both ends, right? What I allow them to do is, like you said, walking over. So I'll walk over and I'll wait for the student to say something again, and I'll be like, wow, that was really insightful. Did everyone hear that? Can you say that again? Right? Do you think you can elaborate on that? Sometimes they're like, yeah. Like now I'm like, oh, do you think you can elaborate on what you like they just said? And sometimes they, they're like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, that's great, that's awesome. And then sometimes I'll ask the student, it was particularly good. And I do this with all my students. If they have like a good comment, I'm always like, can I call on you later to have you like share with the class, because this was great. And some students say no, and some students say yes. But in situations like that, I usually try to point them out so they feel better about themselves, and so they feel valued, and they feel like someone actually hears them. And I also want other students to see that their classmates that they might be ignoring have like valuable feedback, because I've been the person where students did not want to be my lab partner or work with me or study with me. And like, honestly, I felt great in graduate school because I formed a group and we were always at the top. So, and then people wanted to work with me, and I was like, this.
Thank you. So these are actually actual student experience from our data, right? So we heard, I'm just going to wrap it up here for scenario one for the sake of time as well. As an instructor in this scenario, your main priority is to make your student, as we heard, feel seen and heard, because in this scenario, as an example, they feel alienated, and that are you going over, and as we just heard, that are you going over and acknowledging that group, right? And once you make that observation, that really shows appreciation to the student, and that it does, as she does put it, it shows that you have your students back. So I think that's those are the approaches and strategies that we took for this scenario. So we'll go on to scenario number 2, which reads, a Black student realizes that she received a lower grade on a homework assignment than the rest of her white group members, although they had very similar answers. She talks with the TA who graded the assignment, and they respond with, in quotes, "there is nothing that I can do." So same discussion questions posed for this scenario. I'll take another group here, volunteer for these responses.
Thank you. So my very large table had a robust discussion and we talked about the lack of training that TAs have. So we wanted to start there, that the TA needs to be trained most of the time. They come in with a very, very little experience, maybe just a few hours sometimes. And then also to have real clear guidelines on what grading looks like. And include that within our syllabus and understanding for both the student and the TA. And then to intervene as well, to be able to say, well, I'm understanding this is a discrepancy. Let me see both of them and not just let it be stuck there, so that the TA will never be able to say, there's nothing that I can do. False. And then to go a little bit further, we also just talked about, for the first question, how would this experience impact the student? And we flipped it and said, how would it impact us as a faculty? To know that one of your students were not heard or didn't feel like they received justice in terms of an equitable grading. And so how would we feel? And so we kind of flipped that a little bit and talked about the importance of having more inclusion for the class that you're teaching, and making sure that they know that there's a process to this.
Thank you so much. So you just heard that one of the good strategies, again here, establishment of like a grading system of training, rubric can avoid the scenario, but can also help once you've done as an instructor, right? Because this is your classroom, you have oversight of the TA, you have oversight of your students. What she just mentioned is something that onus of responsibility to have to make an action, right? So that quote isn't true, right? There's nothing that they can do. So I have a little group here.
Just wanted to add to that, all of those things, but I think it's really important that the students know like the procedures to follow. Because like you can say it's like written down, right? But like when I first started teaching college students, I would just hand them the syllabus and then expecting them to read it and like so then I remember I had a situation with my mom who taught elementary school was like, well, did you read it to them? Did you? And I'm like, what? So like maybe like reading those parts out to them on the first day.
Absolutely. So just to add on to that, if you guys would allow me, I'll share with you a bit of it, but I might do that after one of the group contributes for this group. For scenario number 2, and the other group volunteers being in the chat.
You had a lot of good stuff to say. I won't reiterate a lot of those things. We said all those things exactly word for word. One of the things that I think, so Allison and group, she talked about, they do have the training in engineering, but really talk about ways that we might improve it, or it might be improved, looking at specifically implicit bias and things like that. One of the things Hunter said, not to call people out, that I thought was really good, because you changed his whole life there. Because he had talked about he might have to change his syllabus with some things he has for like saying the TA is the final grading, authority on this, that maybe that's not the best way to handle it. So I mean, it's even got us thinking about because we have a few folks here who are TAs at our table too, which is nice. We have to pick on them on. They had a lot of good insight on it. But this was even that's aside from it, without even considering the scenario, I can help us think about
Thank you. Yeah, one more group, yeah.
We talked about most of this, but I just wanted to raise the question of how is it that the TA would know the race of the person, but are they not applying grading?
Very good point. So in this scenario, it didn't state how it was graded, whether it's blinded grading or not. But that's an approach. So I want to, for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap up scenario 2 a little bit for the group. And what I was going to share a bit earlier is that certainly when I was as a student as well as an undergrad and graduate student, there was that grading policy. It was not uniform across all the syllabi in my class. So I was a biology MPH MD, so most of my science courses have that. For my non-science courses, they didn't have a point fishing or grading rubric. So when it comes to any grading discrepancies, right, or any process discrepancies that they may have, there may not be an established rule, which can be a problem because it's case by case scenario, and it's you know, as a student, you may feel it's you against the TA, and then it comes back to you as an instructor to have a time with you. So that communication, I think that group mentioned, that communication is important to ensure everyone is in the syllabus, but you read it to them and they ensure they have the understanding of what they can do when they feel that they're in this position. So that's it for scenario 2. We'll move on to part B, and I'll pass it over to Julie.
So thank you so much for your work together and the discussion and the great ideas you generated. And in these scenarios, racial implicit bias was at play, and in order to address it, as I alluded to earlier, we need to replace unconscious negative beliefs with conscious positive beliefs. And when we intentionally raise our awareness of the strengths that Black students bring to our classroom, this awareness can inform our actions. So one way to do this is to learn about community cultural wealth, which we introduced you to today, or renewed your learning on it. And so this part B, because most everyone was with us this morning, we looked at these 6 forms of capital that you see on the slide, and we underscored the point that while these things can be used to resist oppression and contribute to success in education, they're often unrecognized. And so for this part B, what we want to do, we shared a lot of data from our study, but we want to encourage you to think about students that you interact with at Oakland University. Take a look at the forms of community cultural wealth in the table for part B. Just kind of refamiliarize yourself with them if you want to read that or talk through that. But what we're really interested in is hearing some examples. And if you're not at Oakland University, draw upon the students that you work with at your institution. And we want to hear some examples of community cultural wealth you see in your students, because that awareness is really critical for the last part today, where we're going to talk about taking action. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes for this. And again, we'll be circulating in case you have any questions or comments for us. But we're looking forward to hearing more about how your students' community cultural wealth is showing up in the classroom and around your college or university. What I'd love to do at this time is to hear from folks, especially if you haven't had a chance yet to contribute to the overall group discussion, although all are welcome. What are some forms of capital that you recognize in your students here at Oakland University or at your institution where you are?
Can I just? Okay. Oh.
Everyone, I'm Sarah. So I said social capital. So to be honest, in my Bible courses, I do not have many Black students, but I have a large population with kids of Middle Eastern descent. And by far, they blow a lot of my other students away with their social capital. It's amazing to see them being able to jump in and help each other on either coursework, or how to navigate A lot of them are pre-professional track, how to navigate all the ins and outs of those application cycles and whatnot. That was my first capital that
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing about the social capital you've seen with your students and how those strong connections and sense of community they have means they're looking out for one another's well-being when it comes to things like applications that are processes that can be lengthy and very involved. That's wonderful. Thank you.
So I teach in film, and I talk to my students regularly about how film has a long history of systemic bias against women and people of color, and my students already know that. I usually don't have to tell them. And so what I observe in my classes is lots of resistant capital that like they're aware and aspirational, right? Like they're aware that they're trying to enter a system that really kind of excludes them and they don't care. And they're really well versed in talking about the racism and the implicit bias that is built into film institutions, and they know how to do it, and they frequently do it, and they're very comfortable doing it to their white classmates. And I just think that's really cool. I'm also gonna just humble brag that we have one of the most racially diverse majors on campus. Which we're very proud of, given the bias that film historically had.
Thank you, Bridget, for talking about the aspirational and resistant capital that you see in your students and that willingness to really address head-on issues of racism or other forms of oppression within the classroom really provides an opportunity for other students to learn. So that's wonderful. And that aspiration, like you said, that doesn't matter if we haven't seen folks like us welcomed in a certain space, we're going to go forward in that space because we're needed there, our voices should be heard there. That's wonderful. How about, I know the chat has been quiet during this workshop, but I would love to hear from someone in the chat. So if they haven't typed in yet, have they? Well, this is their invitation to share with us. But how about one more in the room while we wait for maybe someone in the chat might want to type something or might want to share something out loud. Thank you.
So I'm Allison, by the way. The one I guess I haven't been here that long, but some of my students have really emphasized the familial capital. I think of the ideas of the particular students I'm thinking of my experience happen to be first generation students, and they were saying that their families were in the background saying, "You can't quit. We need we need you to go. We need you to continue." Basically, these students were kind of their families to get to higher social mobility, and so they were very excited and very supportive of these materials.
Thank you, Allison, for sharing about the familial capital you've seen and those ties your students have to their families and what the work they're doing is not just for them, but for their families as well. So that's wonderful. And then were we successful in encouraging folks in Zoom? No, okay. Well, we're glad to have you with us, folks in the Zoom, and look forward to hopefully hearing from you if you like. But we'll go ahead because we do want to get to the action plan today. So I'll turn things over to you, Brooke.
Thank you, Julie. So we'll move on to part C, taking action in support of our students. So I have some content slides as the part C for those here in person. As you received the part C handout, we'll go over some what we just talked about both in part A and part B. So we've heard it kind of starts with doing our own work first. That's gaining that self-knowledge and what we talked about from the beginning of the seminar, as well replacing the implicit biases with conscious ones. So got ahead of myself. So it's continuing to educate ourselves on the racial climate our students have in our campuses, or even other campuses as well as increasing our knowledge of these students' achievements, right? So this goes back to the anti-deficit approach that they're utilizing their strengths to succeed, right? The third bullet point is about participating in existing professional development.
So you might, if this is the first time you've heard something like this, it isn't the case for this cohort. But if it is, you might have the question of, where do I start? So it's reaching out with existing professional development programs that help build cultural competence, such as this OU teaching symposium workshop we're participating in. So we wanted to share some specific suggestions from our research team, CCW team, with the caveat that we talked about earlier. This is not a checklist. These are some suggestions of, if you had questions, if this was your first time hearing about any of this content, what are some examples? Where do I start? Just as a starter. So related to professional development organizations, volunteering with ones that already support students, maybe already on the campuses. Those exist at the University of Georgia in our research study by attending those club events that are engage faculty-student interaction outside of the classroom, right? So that's super important that you may have for student and office hours time to engage with students outside of the classroom, but other avenues that students can reach out is very important. We talked about this. I think one group, when I was eavesdropping in the conversations earlier, also mentioned about when using group work in class, that you're observant with the class dynamic and communication, right, between group members. So it goes back to being attentive and assigning groups. You may want to take the approach of assigning groups so no student feels alienated. I heard in the back that they're not picked, last. Also, the addition of the importance of sort of inclusion with our classes, right? So I shared this a little bit in my own personal example earlier, but this is extrapolable to any sort of student that could be experiencing these triggers, these kind of racial, overt, subtle racism, or any other perceived barriers that you have to openly invite students so that they're comfortable coming to you with problems as they arise, right? So that you're aware of them, and that's kind of where it starts. So for part C, this activity is a Google Jamboard, so everybody, including those in Zoom and in class, can participate in a single forum. So the question that you can have, you can access this question through the QR code or the tiny URL from your phones or from your laptop devices. And then for those in the Zoom chat, we'll drop a link of the URL link to take you straight to the Google Jamboard. Because another thing I wanted to share, because we don't have, as you're dropping the tiny URL in the Zoom chat, some specific instructions when you get there. The Google Jamboard is completely anonymous. Please use the sticky note and chat function on your left column. So if you're on a mobile device, you may have to zoom in a little bit. But the most important out of this instruction is avoid the top column bar that says clear flame and setting background. That will erase the answers for everybody. And I'll have to administratively go in and revert to see back the answer. So just avoid that. We'll give about 10 minutes for everybody to individually input your responses to this question. And if you don't have if you're in the classroom here, maybe if you don't have a laptop or a mobile device, share with the neighbor to input your devices so they're anonymous. So you get everybody's responses. So I'll stop talking and give you guys about 10 minutes. And if you, after that, if you could start working on your action plan, the document that was just passed out, look at that to do that. I'm going to give it to Julie for any instructions on action plan as well.
Yeah, I just want to just take a quick moment to underscore the importance of the action plan. If you're like me in April on a Friday afternoon, the idea of filling out this action plan may not be where your mind is at, but I think if you can push yourself to do that, because we don't want you to just walk away with awareness. We want you to walk away with a plan for how you might do something differently to make the learning environments for your students more welcoming. So that's my plea to you to say, I know I've been in your situation, but if you can please dedicate some of the time that we have here together to work on that, I think that will ensure that what we are learning together today transcends, this particular symposium. So thank you for your work on that. And as always, Brooke and I will be circulating in case there's questions. Thank you.
All right, so I think we can reconvene to the larger group. I mentioned earlier, we're keeping the Google Jamboard link. So for work on it as well, if you're still taking time, and for those in the Zoom chat. But we wanted to just share the answers. I won't have it on the board, but I know you guys have it individually on your devices. So some responses that your peers put for this question was, there was the idea of reflecting, so it reads, sticking on reflecting on my own implicit biases and what I can do to address and correct them. So it goes back to the notion of, starts with that self-knowledge, right? Increasing what conscious thoughts to replace your potentially implicit biases. And then there's also another comment, just for the sake of time, before small group work, teach students how to ensure that they are working inclusively. Right, ties back into some of the scenario examples we talked about a bit earlier into the presentation. So that's the end of part C. We want to give you guys some final thoughts. We encourage you to complete, as Julie mentioned, on a Friday afternoon, and to give you guys plenty of time. And we also have the link for the action plan document in the Zoom chat, as well as additional resource. So you complete this to ensure what you learned today. Take your time to individualize it to your specific student and your specific discipline at OU or your respective school. Want to also remind you of that the multiplier effect, ripple effect we talked about. Of course, there's the physical number of students you guys have and interact with, but your interaction with that one student extends beyond that one, and their community cultural wealth that student has. And so Julie and I want to thank you for hosting us today and participating in all of the kind of interactive components of it. Made our lives a lot easier as well. So we will pause for any questions. Our emails are also here for any questions or any, reach out maybe as you're working on an action plan, post our meeting today. And as well as on the right-hand side, there is a QR code for our 2022 paper, Creating Safe Spaces. So we want to also have that for you as an additional resource. So thank you.